Good morning. This time I'd like to call to order the Opioid Abatement Funding Advisory Board. If you would, everybody please turn your cell phones off or to vibrate. Okay. This time we'll stand and have a pledge of allegiance, please. You have in front of you the minutes from the last meeting of September the 12th. I'd like to move for the approval or any additions or deletions. Nobody? Okay. All in favor? Aye? Aye. This time, Ms. Hankins, if you could at this time introduce our next presenter, our next presenters, that is.
We have a few presenters in front of us. I don't, are we gonna go with Wes Marino and, or should we, I guess the question is to ask Tina, what's the reasonable direction to go with this?
I put Wes first and Stefan that way in case they have to leave, because they might have.
Can you use your mic for, I'm recording this.
Sorry. Sorry.
That's all right.
So we'll start off with Wes Marino.
Hey, good morning, committee. Good to be here this
Administrator.
morning. So I've watched a couple of the meetings, and I know there's some questions and some clarifications that y'all had asked for. I would say, moving forward for this committee, your main mission, your main goal, your main function is to seek out strategies and proposals to submit to the Board of County Commissioners, strategies and proposals that this committee workshops and runs to ground that y'all feel would be successful in our community. Maybe it's a strategy that's in South Florida or maybe somewhere else. Maybe it's some kind of cutting edge strategy that's going on. But it's this committee's mission to research out those strategies and those proposals and then gain all of your information about those and present, at some point we'll have to present that to the Board of County Commissioners. And when I say research out, what is the statistics? What is the cost estimate? What are the nuances of the strategy with the proposal? What are the pros and cons? What seems to be working in other communities that could work here, or maybe that's not for us. But to run all of those strategies down, gain that information, and then whether it be the chair or vice chair or another board member, at some point in time we'll have to present to the Board of County Commissioners what those strategies are, what our number one strategy is, 2 and 3. So, if it was me, I would focus on my top 3 proposals maybe, or maybe even 2. But I would keep in mind that the board, they love information. They are like sponges. If you give them literature or information or statistics, they're going to go back, they're going to research it out themselves, they're going to develop their questions, they're going to be informed. And then when the point comes that y'all settle on that and the board settles on that, then we will, if it requires procurement, then we will contact the Office of Purchasing. And it would depend if it's a request for proposals, a request for letters of interest, or an invitation to bid would depend. That's what would tell us which direction we're going from a procurement process. Some things have a committee, RLIs, RFPs. Intent to bid is just that, it's low bidder. So that will dictate what we go with. But I think it's also important to keep in mind that this committee, it's not this board's mission to allocate funding. It is simply to make recommendations to the Board of Commissioners of what y'all feel like would be the most successful strategies, most successful proposals to bring forward and to put into place. And so at that point in time, the board will vote and they'll say, you know what, we agree with our committee. We think this is a great idea. We understand what the cost estimates are. And then when the money starts rolling in, they'll vote to allocate money. And then we'll get with Mr. Lovingood and put the procurement out. And then once that happens, we bring that back to the board for an award. And that's really the process. Pretty short and sweet, I guess. But that's really what it is. Are there any questions?
Yes. So, from my understanding, when we first met, we were like there were different agencies that were gonna kind of
Sure.
come before us and kind of like discuss what they do, and so, because some of them are already in this field and they doing a great job. And they would put, kind of present their processes or their workshop, not workshops, but what they do in the community, and kind of like, I guess, ask for certain funding to continue their business in the community as far as that. And this is one of the avenues in which, they could get funding for opioid abatement. And if, they're already doing it, because we had the EMS gentleman that came last week and talking about the core program that they're looking at implementing and the numbers on that. And so from that, we would gather that type of information, and then we would recommend up to the county commission, like, hey, we think this would be great to fund, or to things of that nature, certain organization. Is that not what we would?
It's kind of along the same lines.
Versus-
You're taking organizations that are doing that kind of work already and seem to be successful. And then, yes, absolutely, listen to the presentations, grab a hold of that information, the statistics, what makes them successful, the ins and outs of the program, and if this committee as a whole feels like, yes, this is a great strategy, we'd like to move it forward, then we would be the committee of the whole, come together and let the board present to the county commissioners what it is, the initiative is, and why y'all think it's a good initiative, the funding associated with the initiative, who is moving forward in the initiative, what is the organization, because the board will want to know all that information as well. And if the board agrees, then they will allocate money.
Okay, all right. Because the way you were describing it, that we would come up with the strategy, because I think outlined in the abatement outline already that there's core strategies that's already there. And what we're trying to do is plug the pieces together to implement those strategies, or make sure those strategies are executed within the community itself. From that particular point, am I reading?
No,
reading
you're
it
exactly right. I mean, if you got folks who are doing it, fine, listen to them, hear the presentations, gather the information. I would also encourage you to look a little more broadly, what's going on in South Florida, what's going on in Central Florida, what's going on, Chief Tercel that was here the other week has a lot of contacts around Alachua, counties that are about our size, facing some of the same issues, some of the same challenges and situations. So there are things that are being done in other communities as well that could be successful here, or maybe they couldn't. But that's what y'all's job is, whether it be somebody local who's doing it. Case management's a big part of this, has to be a big part of this. Education can be a big part of this. So search them out, search the strategies out, put all your facts and figures together, all your information, and then when the time is right, we'll present to the board.
And so with that being said, would they still have to go through a request for a proposal?
Could very well be, if that's, because, we're picking a strategy, not necessarily an organization. Now, there may be an organization moving this strategy forward, but we're looking at strategies. And so if we have a successful strategy that we think will be successful, you lay out the specifications of that strategy, and then in that case, we would do a request for proposals, where you guys would probably be the ranking committee, or certain members of y'all would be the ranking committee. You would advertise for 30 days or 21 days. We take the proposals in, the committee would sit, and again, take a presentation from all the proposers, if there's 3 or 4, listen to those proposals, short list, and then you would negotiate with the number one proposal, who y'all feel are the number one proposer. And the reason I say RFPs, I like RFPs because it's not necessarily just low bid. It lets you take the information in, lets you assess. And this particular organization may cost us a little more, but we feel like they have a whole lot more to offer than maybe proposer B over here. So that's kind of how I see it as it moves forward through the channels.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank y'all.
Thank you, Administrator.
Mr. Chairperson?
Yes.
I was going to let you know that I was talking this morning with Stefan about the Mr. Tercel's program, and from my understanding, it has been funded from, it has been state funded. And as far as creating any new positions, because I know it was something that we had tossed around at the last meeting, that wouldn't be something that we would do because because the county wouldn't be able to absorb that at the end when the money ends. But one of the things that you can do is look at Medicaid, the assisted treatment that's listed there under B, anytime, or under A, the naloxone, providing naloxone. So there's a lot of items here that you could look at through here, which would not mean that you're creating a new position, but you are supporting the positions that exist. So that's one of those things you want to keep in mind when you look at this. We want something that's going to be able to be maintained long-term. And if we can get a handle on getting more of the Medicaid or the medical items that they need to do the job they're trying to do in the field, that's going to be an important long-term contributory.
Thank you. Anybody have any more questions for the county administrator while Mr. Marino, while he's here? No? Okay. Next, I guess we're going to have, the next guest would be the Mr. Lovingood. Is that correct?
Just a moment. Stefan
Oh,
Hall is here,
okay.
and that's who I was speaking to this morning, so if we could have him speak briefly
Okay.
as well.
Thank you.
Good morning, Board. Stephen Hall, Management and Budget Services. Just to kind of, again, give an update. So we haven't received any of these funds just yet. Checked this morning. We do have a special fund set up that segregates these funds from every other fund of the county. And it's basically going to be called the Opioid Fund, which is Fund 122. So once these funds come in, so they'll send us a check, we'll have this, it'll go to our clerk's office. So those funds will sit there until I take an amendment to our board to recognize these funds. So probably, and I can do that as soon as we get it, we can share that information with you. But as far as specifics on spending and things like that, so again, the recommendations that come from this board to my board or our board, will dictate, say what expenditure types, will be allowed for that. Sounds like possibly purchasing some certain drugs to save people's lives who have had these overdoses and things like that. So, so again, we look forward to hearing the recommendations from this particular board to know what is the best way to spend those funds. Based on the information that I've seen so far, Escambia may receive upwards of $14 million over an 18-year period, potentially. So, but those are the funds and those are the amounts that we're looking at. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer those.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, go ahead, Doctor.
Yes, in terms of how the funds are, I guess, aggregated and how they're expended, is it a carryover? Do the funds have to be expended in a certain period of time per year in terms of how they're coming into the county? How does that work in terms of?
Sure. So let's say, for instance, if we got $1.5 million in year one and we spent $1 million, that $500,000 will roll over as a fund balance forward to the next year. So again, until these funds are exhausted, whatever isn't spent will roll over year to year to year until they are ultimately spent. It may be 25 years before we spend them, or however that works. But again, all these funds will be expended and they cannot be spent on anything else.
And I missed this as part of the introduction, and you may not be aware, but Stefan is the Director of Office of Management and Budget. So if you had some budget questions, or he'd be a great person to ask that question to. And I saw that Dr. Williams picked up on that pretty quick.
Thank you. Excuse me. Any other questions for Mr. Hall? Okay, appreciate it.
There had previously been, before you go away, there had been one question about whether or not there would be a single budget or how that would work. I believe that came from Tommy White. Did you still have questions about that?
No, he actually answered in the last question about the rollover, the rollover process, so that's good to know. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate y'all coming this morning. I know you had to get out of a meeting to come here, so thank you. We have another a speaker available. That's Jeff Lovingood. He's the purchasing director, and he's going to speak to you on the procurement process. Where would you like to, you're good there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Is there anything specific that the board would like to hear about, or would you like me to just kind of give a general overview of the procurement department?
I would myself would prefer just a general overview of
Okay,
how
great.
this step works. We're trying to learn how to walk again.
I understand. So for the county, there are a couple of ways that we have the opportunity to purchase the goods and services that are needed. First of all, we can do purchase orders for anything $4,999.99. We could basically do that with we could do that purchase with simply a P card or a purchase order with a single invoice or whatever the case may be. Once you hit the $5,000 threshold, that's where I'm required to obtain 3 quotes whenever possible, if it's possible. If something were to be deemed a sole source or single source, there are state statutes that determine how we handle those. So we try to avoid those. Sole source and single source are kind of 4-letter words, if you will. We really try to avoid that if at all possible. Once you exceed the $5,000, the 3 quotes, that is sufficient for any purchase up to $49,999.99. The only asterisk that I would put with that is that at the $25,000 level, that requires board approval for everything, regardless of what it is. So if you were to bring me something that you wanted to purchase for $24,000, I would ask you for 3 quotes. If you were bringing me something for $26,000, I would ask you for 3 quotes and board approval. Okay. If it's something that is for $50,000 and over, or the expected cost will be $50,000 and over, then that would be a formal solicitation that would be issued by my department, and we would handle all of the legal information. We'd handle all of the information regarding risk, things of this nature. We're kind of the coordinator for the county, so we put all those things in place so that the folks that don't do this on a daily basis aren't tasked with all the legalese, if you will. So we're there to support and be there for you to handle that procurement, okay? Those are kind of the benchmarks as far as the procurement process is concerned. I would be happy to go into the different solicitation types so you have a better understanding of that. Because I think that picking the right solicitation type, I think, has a lot to do with achieving your goal, if you will. And as Mr. Marino noted earlier, if you were to do an invitation to bid, that's typically my starting point. It's very rare that someone would come to me and say, I need a complicated RFP, and it could be handled much more simply if we can figure that out. And so that's one of the things that my department does is we don't just look at the information you provide. We want to make sure that we're understanding your goal so that at the end of the day, that solicitation, when everything is complete, your goal is achieved. The last thing we want to do is develop a scope or something to that effect that has some conflicting information, so that when we get to the part where we're trying to develop an agreement, my legal department goes, Jeff, what are you doing? Which way are we going with this? We want to have all those things outlined up front. So an invitation to bid, as noted earlier, is strictly price. That is where you know exactly what it is that you're buying. You typically have an idea of how much you're buying, but it's not required that you give an exact figure. For example, if you were buying a specific type of drug, then we could say in a solicitation or even a request for a quote, we can just say, what is your cost per bottle? And what is the size of that bottle? And so we can do a direct apples-to-apples comparison for those products or services, whatever the case may be. When it becomes more of a scenario where we're interested in hearing our options, maybe we don't know exactly what we need to buy. It's not as easy as saying, I want 10 of product X and I need 50 of product Y. If that's the case, then a request for a proposal or request for information may be best utilized in those instances. A request for proposal is basically where you come to potential bidders and say, this is the parameters with which we have to work. We have funding from the state. We have funding from whatever resources are going to be funding these projects. They have their own requirements. Each and every one of those would have some information that we'd have to follow, which is not a problem. But at that point, we're saying, this is our goal. How would your firm get to that goal? How would your firm achieve that goal? And it's kind of like, I kind of liken it to the spaghetti maps for a hurricane. They're all over the place, but eventually you narrow it down to one thing, and that's usually the one that's right. Okay, so in that early process, I always encourage people not to be kind of freaked out a little bit by all the information. Let's just focus and narrow it down to exactly what our task is. Okay, and then from there, as Mr. Marino quickly pointed out, there's a review process where all the data is reviewed from all the different submitters. There are selection criteria that are noted up front. The one thing I always like to tell folks is, as we're doing a solicitation, as long as there's no law that says we can't do it, then we probably can do it as long as we tell people up front that we're going to do it. I'll give you an example of that. If I need to require a specific kind of insurance, I can't wait until the bids have already come in to tell you that, because that vendor's going to have a cost associated with that. And without knowing what that cost is up front, then I'm basically asking for a bid that's not usable because it doesn't have all their costs involved. So with that, I'll reiterate, whatever it is that we need to do, we can typically do as long as we just have good communication. Okay? As much as that is a general rule for business, I think it's still the number one thing we need to do generally is good communication. So, but that's the process for an RFP. It'd be very similar if we were to do a request for letters of interest or a request for information from different entities. You're still going to have a goal of that solicitation. You're going to have some expected outcomes. You're going to have some criteria that we have to tell folks in advance what they're going to be judged against, and then we judge them, their presentation, based on that information. And so once, it's kind of one of those things where you tell them what you're going to tell them, you tell them, and then you summarize and tell them what you told them. And if we just follow that process, I think we'll be in great shape. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
I have one question that, let's say we're doing our research, as the administrator said, and we find something we like in Alachua County or somewhere else in the south. And it's unique, the program, whatever program it may be, is unique to a one provider, one vendor. That's their thing they came up with is science-based and proven. How do we go about putting that out to bid to other people that have not done this type procedure before? I mean, I don't know if you've followed.
Sure, I believe I do, and let me try and give an example and see if this is the right thing. One of the things that we buy that can be complicated are vehicles. And so someone may come to me and say, I need an F-150. Well, based on our knowledge, we know that there's, first of all, multiple styles of F-150. There's the base model, there's the mid-range, and the high-end. So we're going to go through, I would go through that process with you and say, okay, what exactly is it that you're looking for from the vehicle? What do you need the vehicle to do? Because as long as we focus on that outcome, which vehicle we pick is really irrelevant. The goal is to get you the vehicle that you need. You may not care whether it's a Ford, Chevy, or Ram, but other people may. For example, our fleet department, we have some great software for Ford products that we don't have for some of the others. So we may lean more heavily towards a Ford just because of that, but you as a buyer wouldn't know that. So that's my job, to communicate that information to you and say, these are all the parameters that we're dealing with so that you can make an informed decision at that point. But then when you start to talk about the different aspects of a program and some of the outcomes that they achieved and maybe they have shown some success, the one thing that I would advocate for is making sure that we just stay focused on the goal as opposed to staying focused on the fact that it needs to be a specific model of truck, that it has to do a specific thing. You know, again, we're not as concerned about the vehicle. We're, as a purchasing department, we are completely agnostic. We have no interest in what brand or anything of that nature, as long as your outcome is where you need it to be. And so I hesitate to suggest copying what other entities are doing. It's good to have that information, but to go out and say we want a firm that can do only A, B, and C eliminates the firms that can do A, B, and C, but also X, which we didn't know about. So it's always good to ask questions more than tell in those types of instances. And so when we're doing a request for a proposal, a request for information, we want to make sure to leave the room open for someone to tell us something we didn't know already. And I think ultimately that's our goal with this board, is to uncover what all of our options are and make the best recommendations possible.
Thank you for that explanation, but also sometimes the lowest and best is not necessarily the best bid.
You're correct.
And that's what, you know, if you get going just for the bottom thing, you might not get A, B, and C, and D. You might get A, B, and C, but they still come in lower. And so, I mean, I don't, anybody else have follow-up on that? I mean, you see what I'm saying, anybody?
I follow you, and I guess my question is, would really the bid process come into play with requests for proposals? So, like you say, if you're describing an outcome, say we're looking to enhance treatment services in the community, and there may be multiple agencies that provide that kind of treatment. So that's really not something that's a bid process, if I understand you correctly. It's more evaluating the different proposals, and not necessarily, price isn't necessarily an issue, or price shouldn't be an issue. Is that correct?
Yes, so there are a couple of methods that can be done there. The first method that I would try is to try and find a bid process that would work, simply because it's the easiest method and it's the most cut and dry. At the end of the day, a citizen can look at a bid tabulation and go, oh, they picked the low bid, okay. But to your point, sir, we're always looking for the best value as well. And invitations to bid can be written in such a way to ensure that we do obtain the best value as opposed to just the lowest cost. You know, should we do an invitation to bid and we get 4 respondents and one is lower than the rest, but we start calling references and the references don't verify that they're exactly what they claim to be, then certainly that is something that if we wrote the solicitation properly, that is an evaluation option that even though it's a bid and we're going for the low price, we've given ourselves the right to say, if your references don't check out, we may not do business with your firm, even if you're the lowest vendor. So that is one thing. Now, to do a bid, you would have to identify exactly what services are going to be provided and at what level they were going to be provided. So if you were to say enhanced care, I would want a definition of exactly what features do you consider enhancing care, and then that becomes our, as you put it, our A, B, C, and D, where if they don't meet those benchmarks, if they don't provide those, then they would be excluded from the remaining review process, okay? So an invitation to bid can have teeth in this instance. Again, we just have to write that in the front. Now, if it's something where you say enhanced services such as, and you list 4 or 5 and put et cetera at the end, that would be a proposal where we're saying, when we say enhanced, we think we're talking about this, but what does your firm do? When you say enhanced, what does enhanced mean? Does it include these things that we've noted? Does it include all of them or a portion of them? Or we kind of do this, but we refer them out for this, you know? You just want the information so you know what they do, is really what it boils down to. So depending on the need, there are a lot of ways we can go, but my job is to keep it as simple as possible for you.
I have a question,
Yes, sir.
Good, Tom.
Director. In this invitation, okay, so your benchmark, so to put out an invitation to bid, it has to go over the $50,000 threshold, is that correct? Or how does it, could you kind of review those?
Anything where we expect that the cost of the service or goods is going to exceed $50,000, that would be a formal solicitation that's issued by my department. If you are looking for, and I'm trying to use examples that are not necessarily related to this program, but if you were looking for vehicle parts, and they're going to be under $25,000, $25,000 requires board award, but if it's below that, I only need 3 quotes. And so you're going to say, I'm going to buy 10 air filters, I'm going to buy some radiator fluid, I'm going to buy this, I'm going to buy that. It's all under $25,000. I would ask you for 3 quotes for those things, and we can move forward.
You say under 20, you said anything over 25,000 would require
Board approval.
board approval, okay, and then invitation to bid above that. My question is, there are a number of agencies that do some of the same things here. And all agencies can't handle all people, or don't handle all people or whatnot. It's a community. How can we kind of set up a system that where if we wanted to get, I mean, it's not a lot of funding, but in my thinking that you would still want to get funding if you could to multiple agencies sometime to help out in their cost of operation, because they do service, so one of them might be on this side of town, one of them may be in the north part of the county, and everyone can't reach that one agency if they say we send out a request for a proposal, and we just pick one, and they're in this region, but then, you understand what I'm saying? I mean,
Yes, sir.
so how can we navigate that if we wanted to, I'm gonna say like if we wanted to just share the funding, I mean, put funding, because Lakeview do things and CDAC do things, and there's different people that do different things that brings that. When I look at the scope, when I read through this scope of work that's laid out, it's pretty broad. I mean, it covers a lot. I'm not saying it's broad in this context, because whoever wrote this was pretty detailed in what we want to get accomplished. But there are certain people that will go to certain places and won't go to the other. But all of these agencies needs kind of some help in doing their business. So how can we navigate? How do we navigate that?
There's a couple options available to you, regardless of the amount and regardless of the solicitation type. Should it be something that's over $50,000, we issue multi-awards quite often.
Okay.
And I'll use debris hauling as an example. We had a solicitation for debris hauling where we brought in 10 firms. Because when a hurricane comes, we don't know where it's going to go. There are some that are to the east of us, some to the west of us, and some to the north of us. So depending on where that hurricane goes, I'm going to pick up the phone and call someone from the opposite direction, is probably going to be my first phone call. But along with that, if you have entities that, if we have a catalog of services that we're looking A through Z, and one firm can do 10 things and another firm can do 12, but 5 of them are the same. As long as we identify how we're going to handle those overlaps, we can have as many firms as you need to under contract to provide service. We just want to make sure that there's a clear delineation on which entity is doing what.
Okay, awesome. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, if I could just add a little bit. So the model that I think you may be speaking to is very similar to our outside agency funding requests that are made usually as part of the annual budget. We are looking at very similar process for homeless, to expend homeless dollars. So the strategy of this committee is to develop an application for these agencies to apply what they do, who they are, what they do, still all the same information. What is their success rate? What demographic are they serving or trying to focus in on? Particularly, that might be a proposal that this committee makes. We want to draft an application for our local partners to apply for some of this money and tell us how they plan on utilizing some of this money and how successful they believe they can be. That might be your strategy.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
If I could follow up on that, does the process also allow us to have a continuation funding over years? I guess that's either a procurement question or a question to you. For example, if we decide that whatever the strategy is, that it's not a one-year investment.
No, I would agree with that. I would say as you move forward now, what we would speak to as far as the application process, we have an annual review. And part of that application is certain metrics that have to be reported, performance measures that have to be met. And at the end of that annual review, if those things are being met and that organization is being successful, well, they can certainly apply maybe for a little bit more money. We have some, honestly, we get a lot of applications, they don't fill in any of that criteria. They don't fill in that information, and so therefore they eliminate themselves from the ability to utilize some of that outside funding. That's just a single strategy. If as a board, as a committee, there's other strategies y'all can bring to the table as well. But I think I see where you're going, and I believe that might be a way for us to do that.
Yes, some fact-based finding, as I say, evidence-based as the bylaws say, like needs to be evidence-based that, what you're doing is working, and it has to, you have to be able to show the numbers.
Sure.
Like how many you did an intake, helped, how many that it actually was successful. So that's awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I would direct you to, and that is in your bylaws, and that is the directory by the board under section 10 of the board's order, that says a certain date each year. That's when you set your annual meeting to review that data and to make sure that you're the effect of the abatement programming.
Any further questions for the administrator or the Mr. Lovingood? Any other discussion about any of the items today?
I think our first really hard task is, as a county administrator said, is for us to nail down our specific strategies, what we really want to zone in on, and come up with that framework, and therefore then we can know, then we could put out our information as far as advertisement of different agencies to come in and do, to tell us how they could assist in these strategies. Not so much of a official request for bid or whatnot. What would you call that? What would you call that? A request for information or something of that nature?
Request for information is still a formal process that we would go through. So with regard to contacting potential vendors or things of this nature, it is perfectly acceptable to obtain information and just say, hey, company, you seem to be in this space. What are some things you're dealing with? What does your company do? Things along this line. That's a perfectly acceptable conversation. What may not be acceptable is if one were to go up to someone and say, hey, I'm on this board and we have some money we want to spend, how would you spend it? That's a different thing.
Right.
And so we want to avoid that as much as possible. We want to make sure that we're asking good questions of these vendors, and sometimes we have to ask I always claim that I'm ignorant, and so I don't know the answer, and that's why I need you to tell me what the answer is. And so with that in mind, we can get lots of information that way. But we don't want to do a formal process until it's time to do the formal process.
Right.
And so with that, I would caution and just say, whatever conversations you want to have, it's fine to have them as long as someone else is okay hearing that same conversation.
So for people, when they want to come and like present their agencies, they need to do that after the formal request for information has gone out.
That is correct. Now, trying to identify who those firms are and things of that nature, that's something that we can help with. We do it all the time for different firms for different types of products and services. So that should not be a problem.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I could.
Thank you, Tommy. One question I got. Let's say, use for example, Lakeview. They want to come to us and, for funding for a program they have. Do we have to go through you to get Lakeview here to give a presentation to us? Or can we ask Lakeview, what is working for you? What have you done that meets the strategies that we're striving this committee's for? Can they come and talk to us as a whole, as a meeting or they need to go through purchasing that get, I'm confused a little bit.
The best clarification I can offer is this. Any conversation that you have with one entity, any other entities that may want to be involved want that same conversation. So I would caution against selecting any one firm to come in and do anything. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense, but at the same time, it's kind of ambiguous there. I
Sure.
guess. It becomes subjective and not objective.
Sure.
You got somebody that says they got a program that works and say Dr. Williams knows it works. They just need more funding for that program. And, it's back again to the lowest bid is not always the best bid. And if they got a proven program, and maybe the administrator's got some input here, obviously. But I don't know if it's confusing my question, but
No, I understand where you're coming from. What I would say is, if you've ever seen the board move through the budget process and work with outside agencies, every outside agency, again, submits their application, and you will see a lot of them that will come to that podium on a certain day, whatever the day that's marked, publicly advertised meeting, and they will highlight, here's who we are, here's what we do, here's what our current budget is, here's our current success rate, this is what we found to work well, these are the things we found that don't work well. And, at that point, and it might take a little time on y'all's part to listen to, maybe 4 hours worth of presentations, but it's a publicly advertised meeting. If you're trying to get to know the local partners, maybe that's a good way to do it. You're not really dangling the carrot, so to speak. You just want to get to know your local partners. You're not asking them at that point in time, it's not specifics. Just tell us what it is that you do and how well you do it. And then the committee can listen to those presentations and they can decide, hey, I think A and B are something worth us digging into a little bit more, maybe E and F, not so much. But through that, it would be kind of like more of the outside agency process. But I would say, and that process is a strategy. So that's an initiative, that's a strategy in of itself. So beyond that process, what other strategies and proposals could be out there, and what are other communities doing from an education standpoint? Like I said, education is a big thing. Case management, who's being successful at doing case management? Those types of things. But putting together an application for our outside agency funding, so to speak, is a single strategy. the way I look at it. And then, if there's an initiative to purchase kind of medications or materials or something like that, then we can work through the Office of Procurement to do those types of things. I don't know if that adds any clarity or not, but.
Yeah, so basically, we just need to set a, kind of like a date. I see what you're saying, to be able to hear these different agencies, kind of like give them an invitation to come in and kind of introduce themselves and kind of tell what they do, so everyone
Right.
can have an opportunity to do that. Because we all know people, and we all know people that work with these different agencies, and it's kind of just, we said in the onset of this, we said, okay, we can just invite people down to that's in these agencies to come and speak. But I see what you all saying and what you're saying from a legal standpoint and from a public standpoint. When you're dealing with public funds, you have to make it public. You have to detail a meeting, a date, and this is the time and the place in order to initiate those conversations.
As long as it's done in the sunshine.
Yes. So maybe after the first of the year, because we're not meeting in December, correct? Yeah, maybe after the first of the year, January or so, we can do that.
I just like the chairperson's response, no. Could I ask a quick question, just as an example? So we have the core strategies, the Schedule A's core strategies. So, and it breaks it into several sections. So one of them is the naloxone and other FDA-approved drug to reverse opioid overdoses. And then it lists out a couple of examples of how to do that. And it goes through different things. And one of them is pregnant and postpartum women. So, and also expanding treatment for neonatal abstinence syndrome. So would they advertise, we are interested in organizations that work in this area and coming and providing information, get to know your partners? Because if you took the whole core strategy, you wouldn't be here for 4 hours, you'd be here for 4 days. Right. So could they take a specific segment and say, okay, so in January, we want to look at people that might be available in the region that, for information purposes only, that handle pregnant and postpartum women and expanding and treatment for neonatal abstinence syndrome?
Sure,
Could
absolutely.
they break it down to a specific area?
If the committee wants to pick several areas and then listen to what our partners come and have to say, absolutely, they can do that. But each partner still has to fill out that application, meet the metrics, performance measures, the demographic, what demographic are they trying to serve, for instance, was what that would fall under. And then again, once it narrows down, then that goes to the Board of County Commissioners. What I would envision would be a committee of the whole, at which this committee would then present these this is our strategy to take applications. So we took the applications, we've listened to all the agencies, our partners, we know what this one does, this one does, this one does. We think these particular agencies, however many there are, or partners, would make good partners to offer funding to. Then at the end of the day, it's still the Board of County Commissioners' decision as to whether they agree or whether they don't agree. I've seen it go all kinds of ways. So, being as upfront, as informational as you can be in your presentations, like I said, these commissioners are like sponges. They will go, they will research, they will find out who these people are, who runs these particular agencies, what is their background. They're going to want to know anything and everything. And they're big into statistics. I've never seen a group so heavy into research, but they absolutely do their homework. So that's kind of how I would see it.
If I could clarify something you just said, are you saying that before we could even invite people for a public forum for information, they'd have to fill out an application? We'd have to create an application for them to fill out? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, absolutely. But that opens it up to everybody.
Okay, but
Because they're vying for public dollars. It's just, again, the best example I can give is when the county goes through the budget process and what we call our outside agencies, that every year they come and they request funding. Some we know very well, and we know their success rates, but they still have to provide all of the information, and they still have to apply to receive some of that money. Even though we know them, they still have to apply. And it does have to be a publicly advertised meeting.
I think we may be talking about, I hear what you're asking, which is about, we just want the information to know what's out there, as opposed to we're not ready to request procurement. Is that what you're understanding?
We're not really, I'm not really advocating procurement at this point. Just because what we want to do, because part of the committee's assessment, they want to know who it is. Now, y'all may know them already, but the board doesn't know them, we don't know them. So as part of coming and telling us who you are and what you do, we want to ask you for certain information to include in part of your presentation to us, or to the committee rather, is what I would say. I guess that's how I would kind of say it.
I think one thing that would give us an option as well, and I apologize if I've cut anyone off, I think one thing that'll give us an option is if we were to do a request for information, we would be able to take what you've said, instead of 4 hours, it would take 4 days. We can ask groups or entities to submit all of their information, and then at that point, we can invite people based on that to come back and answer questions, provide presentations, and things of this nature. So I think if we were able to obtain all of the information, then you as a committee could then pick and choose what information do you need more information on, or where do they need to expand, or whatever the case may be. But I think the big piece of the puzzle was just getting you the information. And a request for information, a formal request would absolutely do that. It would open it up to everyone. And then your presentations would not be from everyone, every possible submitter. It would be from your hand-selected group of entities. And that's not to say that's the final selection. That's just to say these are the companies that submitted information. These are the ones you wanted to hear from. And now we'd like to take the next step, which whatever your strategy at that point is, are you going to request formal solicitation? Are you going to, how do you want to proceed at that point? Because once that RFI is complete, you're kind of at a benchmark and you go, okay, this is where we are. Now where are we going? And so whether it's the next step is an invitation to bid or the next step is an RFP based on a specific type of individual that needs service, then we can absolutely do that.
I have a question. So basically, this committee needs to determine what the strategies are that we want to present to the board first?
That's correct. That's
Okay.
correct. Well, but you nailed that down through gathering of information. I mean, but yes, absolutely. Before any money goes out the door, the board will want to see that information, see y'all's recommendations, and then they'll do their own assessments, and then we'll move forward there.
Is that all, Kathy?
I'm sorry, I guess I'm still struggling with this process a little bit. It seems like even before we would send out any information requesting information, that we might need to, looking at these core strategies, decide which ones we want to get information on. Otherwise,
Absolutely.
And so that, to some degree, requires us to want to look at that, but kind of prioritize. And then the question for me is, what are we basing our prioritization on without information? You know, the five of us have contacts and information within the community in different ways, but there's a lot that we don't know. One of the things I thought was an option was to take a look at what currently exists in the community and what some of the gaps are. We're not asking for people to make proposals about providing a service, but to get a better handle on where do we stand and what the gaps are. But what I'm hearing is that that's not a process that we could use without having more of a formal invitation and individualized.
Yeah, well, I would
pieces.
say this, and I see where Jeff's coming from, and maybe help me out if I'm wrong, but if we do a publicly advertised meeting to listen to presentations from these agencies and our possible partners, we would be fine. For them to come in, give their information, here's who we are, here's what we do. We're not talking dollars and cents so much at this point. We just want to get to know who you are, know what you do, know what your success rates are, and what you think your potential is. I mean, and from that point, if we want to go a little more formal, we can go a little more formal. Develop, like I said, develop some sort of an application that they can, and we have examples of applications. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. We've got our outside agency partnered application. We have our homeless partner's application, which could be very similar to what you guys are looking at doing.
Just to follow up, we had Chief Torcell here last meeting, and he presented what they got going, new initiative they have going. What if it's something along the lines of, we want to support what they have? He says, I do it A, B, and C, but I can do D and E if I had X amount of funding.
Absolutely.
Is that something, where would you guys be involved in that if we wanted to make a recommendation or have
I don't believe
Torcell?
procurement would be involved in that. That would be a recommendation to the board. The board has heard the presentation of the core program more than once. It's got a lot of grant funding with it
Right.
already, so that's a good thing. And so being as familiar as they are, and it's kind of an internal thing with county staff, with Chief Torcell and his folks. So at that point, if it's part of this committee's recommendation to the board to give $25,000, $50,000 additional to the core program, y'all can certainly make that recommendation. That particular recommendation would not need a procurement process.
Okay, thank you.
They would just have to submit with the application and then
Absolutely,
just,
and
when we get to that point, we can just
Yep. And
lay it out.
Chief Torcell can give you more information.
Oh, no, we're good, we're good with Chief. Chief he's already did his presentation, even though it was kind of like informal, but now we're putting some structure to
Sure.
this, so, okay, application first, so is it possible we can just get one of your outside agency applications, kind of piggyback on
I'll
that?
give you the outside agency and homes application, Ms. Liz Kissel. I will have email that to all the board members, Christie as
If
well.
that can go to Tina and she can handle the administration
Sure,
of the board
absolutely.
members. We're trying to make sure we keep blind copies going out so
All
that
right.
we don't have any
I'll give it Liz and we'll send it
communications.
to Tina.
So what we're really talking about is just basically like a informal kind of meet and greet. Not, sort of speak, we're just like, hey, here we are, this is what we do.
Sure.
And then when we get that detailed down more into our core strategies, we can kind of like, okay, you can apply for this particular set of fundings not funding, but to provide these services and things of that nature, and that's where we can get more detail
Absolutely.
on to what we can do.
Right, and I was just talking to Stefan about this, so yes, you can do an informal meet and greet. The request for information and the format that they're going to send out, that's how you make sure people show up. So you kind of get them, you get them in an understanding, because otherwise you can see we're sitting in an empty room. If you want people to come and talk to you, it's better to have the formal approach of at least getting the request of information. There's a communication going. If nobody's interested in helping us, then we got to come up with something, right? So that's why that's part of that, to make sure you have people show up and that want to speak to you. And then when they contact Tina to get on the agenda, then we can get them on the agenda, and then the public knows they're going to be here in case the public's interested in that area and they're watching us or listening to us.
How would they know? Will we send this out to them like directly to all these different agencies, or, because if sometimes when you put it out in the like on the public paper, because what do you all advertise? Not that little, what's that paper
Escambia
called?
Sun Press is where we advertise at the moment.
Like, who actually reads that?
But look, so listen, on top of the public advertisement, we do, like if we take a project out for bid, or we're trying to hire a consultant to design a project or whatever it is, yes, we're going to publicly advertise that this is what we're looking for, this is what we want to do, but we're also going to have a list of vendors that do this kind of work, and we will shoot them an email just to make sure they're aware of what's going on, and they can choose if they want to come present what they do or not.
Okay.
Any more questions for the staff?
I was also going to let you know that county, so for instance, Tercel coming and speaking county, he's a county employee. County employees can always come and talk to you about, this is what we're seeing, these are where we're having, this is where we think, you might want to look into your planning sessions. That's always an option. That's why it was easy to bring him in, because he's already working in the core strategies. And that gave you an idea of what's out there and what the programs that are going through. He's already in it, and he works with county. So that's something else too, that we can continue to look for county directors or employees that can come help you. Hey, this might be an area that you want to look into for your planning.
Any other questions with staff today and the administrator? Nope. Okay. Thank y'all very much for your presentation and answering the questions today, taking your time out of your busy schedules. All right. Christie, anything else that,
We just need to set the next meeting. So the third Monday is actually a holiday in January. I think we've been basically going on about the third Monday. That's Martin Luther King Day here in the junior day, and so we won't be open for that.
okay, how about, everybody look at your calendar for the second Monday, January the 9th, and see what it looks like for 10 a.m.
I'm good that day.
Everybody good? Okay. If we can then could you check the availability of the chambers for that 9th? Does that look all right, Christie? Are you still looking?
I'm still trying to.
Okay. Sorry.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, go ahead.
So in that particular meeting, we've gotten through listening to different agencies, and now we've gotten down to the nuts and bolts of kind of like the process of procurement or the process of selecting. So should we be more focused on getting down to where we're gonna identify our strategies and
That's
things
what
of
I
that
was
nature?
going, next thing I was going to bring up, was I think we need at that meeting, between now and then, everybody kind of go over the core strategies. And let's try to prioritize and come up with a list, like the administrator says, of what is our number one strategy going to be, and then go 1, 2, and 3. I don't think we need to bite off too much at one time, but just start off small and work a little bigger. But we can come to some kind of agreement on what we see as the number 1, number 2, and number 3 strategy, or maybe 4. I'm just saying, throwing it out there.
One question I have, do you think we could get maybe the chief back in here, or maybe somebody from the hospital or something like that, that can tell us where the gaps are in the treatment of this stuff, so we have a better idea of what we need to do?
I don't see why not. If Christie can
I'm sure
arrange
he'd be
that.
willing to come back. We'll just have to coordinate with his schedule. And in the meantime, we'll also look into see what maybe some of our, the community redevelopment, if they have anything on that. See if they can offer some information also. They encounter a lot of this every day. So we'll find someone new to speak in January for you, if we can't get Mr. Torcell to come back. It looks like there isn't anything on the calendar yet in this room on Monday, January 9th, but I don't have full access. So right now, there's nothing else on for January 9th in here.
Okay, well,
We usually don't find out until we try to set it.
okay. Well, tentatively, we'll set up for January the 9th, and then we'll coordinate after that if something comes up with that, so. Anybody, anything else, like I said, any input, please, on strategies? I mean, let's not to discuss it now, but be ready to discuss it when we come back in January, if that's all right with everybody, so.
If you want a good example, as they were talking about how the board does those workshops, you can look on our website, on the official website of Escambia County, and go back and look. It'll say workshop, Escambia County workshop. Is it committee, Board of the County Commissioners workshops? And you can see, you can just look at the agendas. You don't have to watch the whole program. But you can look at the agendas and the supporting materials and kind of get a feel for how that operation works. And the budget workshops are the ones you need to be looking into. You can see how they do that. Usually the supporting materials, I think, has the applications in them. I'm getting head nods. Okay. So you want to look for those.
All right, thank you, Christie. Anything else come before the board? Tina, I'd like to thank you for all your hard work you put into this, and on behalf of the board, so. Well, if nothing else come before the board, we will stand adjourned till January the 9th, tentative. Thank you.
Have a happy Thanksgiving and a Merry Christmas, everyone.